Well, good afternoon and welcome to Developing for Microsoft Surface. My name is Brad Carpenter and I have been with Microsoft for about 17 years. Most of my time was in Windows, spending a lot of time with PC hardware and device driver developers. And about 3 months ago, I moved over to the Surface team where I'm responsible for the Surface platform software and SDK team. And today, this is a 300 level session class. And a couple of our SDK experts, Robert Levy and Doug Kramer, are going to come up here in a few minutes and take you through some examples of how you can take your existing applications built on WPF and add in support for the unique attributes of Microsoft Surface. But before that, I'm going to talk to you about the paradigm shift that we see occurring in the PC space and your opportunity within that. And I do want to note that we are going to come back up later for questions and answers, so if you could hold your questions until that point, that would be great. I think it's fair to say that we're going through an inflection point in computing today as it relates to interfaces. And if we go back a ways, all the way back to the command line interface, that's probably an interface many of us in this room had to program to. And it was relatively easy and straightforward. With the command line, text was both your input and your output. And there were several languages you had to go off and learn: Fortran, COBOL, Pascal, and C. But if you knew how to go off and do this, you were somebody who was in demand. The target audience was also really simple. It was your technical peers as well as yourself. You didn't have to worry about anybody else using these programs. And if you understood the commands and the arcane syntaxes that went with them, you were in high demand because you understood sort of a black magic. You could sit down at this black screen and type in commands and things would just work. But then we had a major change in the early 80s as we moved to a graphical user interface. And the GUI was one of several key changes that really helped to drive the growth of the PC ecosystem that we all know today. And with the growth of the PCs and the GUI came some other complexities that we had to learn how to deal with from a development perspective. Suddenly you had multiple forms of input. You had a keyboard, you had mice, you had joysticks, and from an output perspective you had text as well as graphics. And over time we started to standardize on languages and develop frameworks that remained consistent. And as these applications grew and demand grew, we started to build applications for the internet, rich internet applications. And over time we had to start to deal with other devices that could be plugged into external buses such as USB. But one of the main things that really changed during this inflection point was the target audience. Suddenly, you had to start designing applications for your coworkers, those folks over there in marketing that you had to deal with, and suddenly your friends and your family were also using these applications. And so that was a bit of a challenge for a while, for us to figure out how to design applications that were easy for people to use. Because this new audience suddenly was trying to figure out, well, what is a window, and how do I go click on an icon, and I don't understand menus, or what's a mouse pointer. And this was somewhat of a hard transition for us to make, but over time we started to make applications easier to use, and the market exploded, and the opportunity went along with it. And if you were able to make that transition from being a COBOL or a Fortran developer, moving over to the standardized languages and frameworks, you were in high demand. We feel the same way about the natural user interface, or the NUI, as we believe that this is a major inflection point that we are in now. And with NUI comes other forms of input that you're not used to today, whether it's touch or gestures or actually objects that are being placed down. We are going to continue to make it easy for you to develop by extending existing frameworks. But you're going to have to start thinking about how you do design differently, whether that's visual design or interactive design. Because you may be in a situation where you've got 10 fingers and 4 objects that are down on a screen that you have to figure out how to deal with. You're going to have to think about how you connect people together more socially rather than connecting technology together. Because with the natural user interface, we believe you're going to see tremendous growth. Because a lot of these people, they're very much not as tech savvy as what you see today, but they're already familiar with the natural user interface as it relates to touch, whether that's an ATM or a microwave. So you have to think about, as you design applications on the PC that bring people into the natural user interface, how do you make it intuitive? How are they going to figure out what they need to do when they go to a computer that supports touch? It'd be fair to say that an ATM and a microwave today are fairly intuitive, but those are the sorts of things you have to think about designing for. And we believe that the growth here is tremendous. As we look at this marketplace, we believe that by 2013, it's a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem that has opportunity for everybody. And we believe that just as those who were able to adapt to the change from the command line to the GUI and had tremendous opportunity, that those that make the transition from graphical user interface to NUI will also have great opportunity. So as we saw this paradigm shift coming and we saw the size and the opportunity of the market, we started building what is known as Microsoft Surface. And it'd be fair to say that a lot of people still aren't very clear what Surface is. Oftentimes we get asked, well, is it just a kind of a big PC and it's horizontal and it supports touch and it's expensive? Or is it just like they say in the blog sphere, it's just a big ass table? Well, we at Microsoft believe it's much more than that. And our vision for Surface really is to bring forward a new generation of computers and software that help to unleash meaningful, collaborative, and natural experiences for our target audience so that we ultimately can make tables and walls come alive. And with Microsoft Surface, we believe we have 4 unique attributes that help differentiate us from any other touch experiences today. First and foremost is direct interaction. There's not a keyboard or a mouse. Users simply have to grab their digital data and manipulate it with touch or with gestures. We support what we call massive multi-touch. We can support over 4 dozen objects being placed down at the surface at any one time. Third, it's the simultaneous multi-user experience. Research with our partners and research we've done ourselves show that in the horizontal form factor and with a UI that can be orientated 360 degrees, that leads to great social collaboration amongst people. And last but not least is object recognition. In the Surface hardware today, there are 5 cameras that are taking pictures at 60 frames per second, and by filtering through those images, that's how we actually recognize objects. That's how we know that it was your finger that was put down, and we can tell you the orientation of that finger. It's how we recognize shapes, and as some of you have already learned about our optical tags, it's a way we can go recognize a tagging system. And we believe that these 4 unique attributes of Microsoft Surface, combined with the fact that we provide the end-to-end experience through hardware, software, visual design, and interactive design, lead to new and natural experiences for the target audience. And as the vision system continues to evolve and is able to recognize more and more objects, we believe leads to very differentiated scenarios than any other touch experience today. But I think it's probably also fair to say that to date, many of the people in this room really haven't had a chance to experience Surface at a deeper level. This week at the showroom, this week at the convention center, we hope to change that. We've got 16 Surface units spread out across the floor, enabling you to go take a look at the great applications being developed by our partners, as well as to take part in a scavenger hunt application, which is, many of you already got this card here, and it has an optical tag on the back, encouraging you to put it down on the Surface and to play a little bit of a game. But as you go off and you look at those Surface units and you look at the applications from our partners, I want you to think about the different things you got to design for as you look at the applications and the services and content you're developing and how you would adopt them to this sort of form factor. And to that point, I want to highlight a couple of the applications that our partners have developed and how they had to think about things differently. If we start with AT&T, and going into the store and having a different experience from before, I'm sure all of us have gone and bought a cell phone and said, I want to know what the coverage is at my house for both data as well as making voice calls. But if you're like me, you probably also want to know, well, what's the coverage like when I drive to work? Because it ends up I'm on the phone almost all the way to work and all the way home, and I want to make sure I have coverage there as well. Well, what our partner did was go in and take common mapping scenarios, and by using touch, enabled it so you could zoom in and you could see not only where you live, but then you could rotate the map and move it around and be able to follow your route to work to make sure that you had coverage there. I'm sure many of us have gone in and tried to buy a phone, and you look at 3 or 4 phones that you'd like to compare, and so you kind of grab one from the wall and it's tethered, and you grab this other one, and you can't really compare them all that well. But using the optical tagging system I referred to, AT&T has put tags on their phones so that you can set them down on the Surface, and you can compare phones while you sit there and touch them. you're able to bring up information that compares the phones to each other and the different plans. So if you think about designing for that, you have to think about an intuitive way through touch to bring up that information to the target audience. Talk about Harrah's. Some of you may have been down to the Rio iBar and seen some of the applications that are in use there, where they've really focused on the social collaboration piece. And not only have they done that through games, but also through an application called Flirt. And the interesting thing about Flirt is it's an app where there's a camera that's kind of above each table, and you have an opportunity to interact with people at other Surface units. But when you think about designing for that, how do you design to interact with other people without a keyboard to actually be able to send them messages? Another application that Harrah's uses is called Mixologist, which allows you to sort of make an order for a drink because you're tired of waiting for someone to come by. But they had to think about designing an application that would allow for you to add multiple ingredients without having a long list of checkboxes that you just touched. At the Sheraton, they're focusing on the trend in hotels where people no longer want to hang out in their rooms, but they want to go out and hang out in the lobby and socialize with other people. So using Surface, they're able to use our app called Virtual Concierge, where you can zoom in and you can see the points of interest that are around the hotel. But the interesting thing is to see the interaction that occurs with people, whether they're preschool age kids or seniors who come up and they're looking at what's going on and seeing the points of interest, where you can say, well, you know what, last night I had dinner at Morton's Steakhouse just up the street. It's a very good place for you to go. And they have that opportunity to socialize and to collaborate together. And lastly, MSNBC. As I'm sure you're all aware of, we have an election that is coming up here in a few days, and people love to have up-to-date information about what is going on with the election, and they want to see, you know, what's the change in their state or their district. And Chuck Todd is able to use Surface to be able to indicate to people which way states are leaning. He's also, again, using optical tags, able to pull up historical data to show you what the trends were last week, last month, or last year. But this is really just the beginning. And as a business unit, we are focused on 5 verticals for Surface. But I know within this room, there's expertise and knowledge that expands these 5 verticals. And the one thing that I get asked on a very regular basis, including already once today, is, Brad, where do I find developers who can go off and write great natural user interface application services and content? Where is the killer app for NUI? And I believe that within this room, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of innovative people that have the ability to go off and build that sort of application or that sort of content. But by now, you're probably all saying, yes, I do think I could go write the next killer app, but you haven't given me access to the SDK. So with that, I'm happy to announce today that we have Surface hardware and the SDK available this week. For those of you that want to purchase a Surface unit today, they'll be on sale at a 10% discount, which includes a 5-seat license to the SDK. But for those of you that can't figure out how to put one on your airplane to go back home, we're also making available the Surface SDK. And that will be made available to everybody that's in this room today, as well as those that attend our hands-on lab. We are still limiting the distribution of our SDK. And the reason is because this is all a brand new category in a business. We want to make sure we get it right. To date, we've gotten great, valuable information from our partners on how to go make sure that our SDK has the right sets of tools and services and information to make them successful building on our platform. And with that, I'm going to step off stage and introduce Robert Levy and Doug Kramer, who are going to come up here and show you how you can very easily add support to your application for the 4 unique attributes of Microsoft Surface. And I'll be back up at the end to help take questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Robert Levy. I've got Doug Kramer here. I'm a program manager on the Surface SDK team. Doug is a dev lead with us. Together, we've spent 7 years combined on Surface, so we're absolutely thrilled to be here today, finally being able to be part of this announcement of getting hardware and bits in your hands, and to show you how things actually work on our platform. So let's actually start with a demo of how things do actually work on the Surface. Switch inputs, switch over. So as Brad was mentioning, Surface is a vision-based system. We've got 5 cameras and a projector inside this box. Everything that is touching the surface that reflects infrared light, the cameras see, and they report back. So as we can see here, as Doug puts his hands down, we see his fingers and his palms in this beautiful, stunning grayscale. And that image is actually reported up through our APIs for applications to process. The other thing we can do is put down what we call a tagged object that has a unique pattern of dots embedded in it, and that shows up for the cameras as well. Or we could take something a little bit richer, like a crisp $1 bill, almost enough to buy a service, and that shows up in the raw image as well. So not super high resolution, but it's enough that you can say, hey, that's George, and that's a $1 bill. So more commonly, though, what ends up happening is that developers say, no, I don't want to process the raw image. I can get some rich experiences by doing that, but I want you, Microsoft, to process that for me and tell me what you see. Give us some rich metadata about everything on the surface. So here what we see is when Doug puts his finger down, now the system is saying, hey, I see a finger there. It is saying, I know that is a finger. Here's its shape. Here's its size. Here's its orientation, things like that. Rich metadata about fingers. If we were to take a tagged object and place that down on the surface, we get the same thing. Here's where it is, here's its shape, here's its size, and here's its orientation. So as he rotates that, you can see the little arrow will rotate with it. Cool. So surface input is obviously, all right.
Yep.
So surface input is obviously a bit different from mouse or stylus input. But what I want to convince you of today is that you already know all the basics that you need to know for developing against this type of input, because we're based on top of the .NET framework, WPF, Visual Studio, things that you already know and are very familiar with. So let's actually go into the architecture. At the bottom of the stack, we obviously have the custom hardware and the device drivers for the cameras. At the top of the stack, we obviously have the great custom-written applications that you guys are going to help us build now. What we have in the middle, though, is Windows Vista SP1, standard Windows Vista. So what that means for you is that everything you know about how to use the Windows Vista APIs or deploy and manage a Windows Vista machine, all of that carries over with you into Surface. We do have a layer that we call the Windows integration layer that makes it so end users, however, don't need to see the Windows Vista interface when they're working with this immersive Surface experience. So an example of what we'll do here is that we'll try to detect if there is a message box that's popped up that the user can't dismiss with a mouse. And if so, we'll squash it before the user ever sees it so they get to remain in this immersive experience. We also have a custom shell. The shell is what end users will use to launch applications, switch between applications. It tells applications which direction the user was at when they launched the app so it can rotate and face the right way, things like that. And it has APIs so apps can integrate with all of its data. Now, on the input side of things, we have a custom vision system. This is the guy that takes the data from the 5 cameras, stitches it together, figures out what's a finger, how big it is, what size it is, what orientation it is, interprets the dot patterns on the tagged objects, things like that. Now, this data gets reported up to applications through our SDK, our APIs. We have 2 sets of input APIs that layer on top of each other. The bottom layer we call the core APIs. Now, this can be used with any .NET UI framework. So if you're working with Windows Forms or Managed DirectX, or more frequently now, XNA, you'll use our core API layer. You'll say, here's my HWind, and we'll start throwing input data at you. We also have a WPF layer. The WPF layer has all the same capabilities as the core API layer, but it's designed in a way that integrates really well with WPF. And that's actually what we're going to talk about for the remainder of our session today. So how do we integrate with WPF? At the input level, we integrate with WPF by doing everything that WPF does for mouse and stylus input. We plug into their infrastructure with what they call the input manager system. We'll automatically do hit testing for every contact we see on the surface. We'll figure out which control is that input touching. And then on that control, we'll raise some routed events to set some attached properties, just like you would get with mouse and stylus. Now, on the UI side of things, we have 3 buckets of custom controls. The first bucket are controls that are subclass from the controls that you already know and love from WPF, so buttons and list boxes and things like that. The second bucket of controls are things that we've dreamed up that are unique and special to Surface, that bring the Surface attributes to life into your applications. And then the third bucket of controls are base classes that you can derive from if you're trying to build your own Surface-specific controls. So let's look at an example of what it's like to write some WPF code that uses the Surface SDK. So what I have here actually isn't using Surface yet. Right now it's working against mouse. I've got a window. Inside the window is a canvas. We have an event handler hooked up for when the mouse goes down on the canvas. And in the canvas, we also have a button and an event handler hooked up for when the button is clicked. So if we wanted to take this code and port it over to Surface, here's what that looks like. It's a couple of really small changes. We're going to go from window to Surface window. We're going to go from mouse.mouse down to contacts.contact down. And we're going to go from button to Surface button, but we're going to continue to use the same click event because that's what button does after all. So that's how easy it is. Let me drive that point home a little farther. This is our class diagram of all of our input-related APIs for Surface. Don't squint. It's OK if you can't read this, because you already know everything that's on it. If you're familiar with these classes for mouse and stylus, we have the same APIs, the same capabilities, same naming conventions, things like that for the Surface versions. So every one of our input APIs has a direct equivalent that you're already familiar with from WPF's mouse and stylus stuff. So let's look at controls. So we have subclasses of most of the common controls that you know from WPF. And start with window. What we do with Surface window, we derive from WPF's window class, and we add the ability for when the window runs, it will automatically place itself full screen on the Surface display, rotated towards the user who launched the application. Then we've got menus and context menus. What we've done here, we subclassed again from WPF, but we've removed the limitation that you have in standard WPF programming, where you can only have one menu or context menu open at a time. So we have a multi-user scenario. All users can be interacting with different menus and context menus simultaneously. And we've got buttons, radio buttons, checkboxes, toggle buttons, those kinds of things. What we've done here is, again, make them work well in a multi-touch, multi-user environment. So you have multiple users. They each put a finger down on a button, and only one person lifts their finger up. We won't click the button until they all agree and everybody's lifted their fingers up. So it works well in a social kind of way. Look at a couple more interesting controls, listbox and scroll viewer. In these controls, we've added some interesting semantics where we're able to automatically figure out, is the user trying to select an item that they touched, or are they trying to scroll the list up and down? If they're trying to scroll up and down, then we add the ability for them to flick, to quickly move up and down through pages of the list. And we add some nice elasticity effects as they try to scroll beyond the bounds of the list. On slider and scroll bar, again, we subclass from WPF, and we add a nice flicking capability. So you can take the thumb on the slider, give it a quick flick, it'll end up on the other side or somewhere in the middle, depending on how fast you flicked it. And then text box and password box. We do have text input on Surface. It's not super common, but we do support it. If you want to get it in your application, all you do is use one of our text box or password box controls. And then when the user touches these controls, we'll automatically invoke a virtual keyboard on the screen that's rotated to face the user who touched that keyboard or touched the text box. So if our APIs and controls are so similar to WPF, then taking an existing application and porting it over to Surface should be pretty trivial.
It is pretty trivial.
So let's actually take a sample from the WPF samples from the Windows SDK and try going through that exercise.
OK. Put me on the code screen here. OK, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an application that you can find in the Windows SDK. And this is called Photo Store. I'm just going to run it for you real quick. This is the WPF application. So you can see the idea is it's sort of a kiosk type of thing that you might have where like you would bring in your own photos on like a USB drive or something. And it would display your photos here for you to select from. You could pick one, maybe customize the photo a little bit by rotating. Click the buttons here. You're allowed to crop. And then maybe apply. Whoa. No, you can't crop that way. One more time. Here we go. So rotate, crop. There we go. Or apply a black and white effect. In this case, the idea is once you've customized the photo, that you would select some type of gift that you wanted that photo printed on, like a greeting card, for example, add that to your cart, or a T-shirt. You can get a photo printed on a T-shirt. And then when you're finished with that, see the rest of the app here, you hit the upload button. It goes up to the order desk at the front of the store. You can pay for your transaction, complete your order, etc. So that's the WPF Windows app.
Cool. So let's port this over to Surface.
Absolutely. Let's do that. So there's really only 2 steps required to port a WPF app over to Surface. The first step that you have to do is just add a reference to the Surface assemblies. So I'll go into Project here and click Add Reference.
We're looking for Microsoft.surface.presentation.
So let's take a look at Presentation. There we go. So we added that reference. It shows up right here. And then you do need to add the equivalent of a reference in the XAML as well so that you can reference it in the XAML file. And you do that with a namespace. So if we just add an XML namespace, I'll use S for Surface.
Cool.
And notice that we just have IntelliSense that pops up right here. And there's your Surface namespace. So we'll just add that in. So that's step 1, adding a reference. Step 2 is simply replace the occurrences of the WPF version of the controls with Surface versions of the controls.
So you just need to find all those controls and then add Surface to the beginning of their name. So window becomes Surface window.
Yes, and in fact, I can do that with a quick replace here.
Little regular expression magic.
Yes, regular expressions. OK, so all I'm doing here with this regular expression is looking for occurrences of window, button, scroll viewer, or list box, and I'm simply prepending them with our namespace and the word Surface.
Cool.
So I'll hit Replace All. Get 23 occurrences replaced. Close that, and I'm done porting this app to Surface.
So when you hit Run, then this app will show up on the Surface?
It will, indeed. And for those of you that are wondering, the development PC that I'm using right here is this actual Surface unit. So I just have a second monitor connected to that. Now, when I ran the WPF version of this app, it just showed up on my coding monitor here. But because I've changed it to a Surface window, it will automatically find the Surface display. So if you can switch me over.
You're switched.
I'll hit F5. And there we go. We have the same application running on the Surface display. But now it has the touch-enabled Surface versions of the controls. And so you can see that we have that flick behavior and the elasticity effect in the list box that Robert referred to. The buttons are touch-enabled.
Are they multi-touch?
They are multi-touch.
So I can
now.
rotate in black and white at the same time?
I think you can. Look at that. So, same functionality, but now running on Microsoft Surface.
So that's neat, Doug. What do you guys think? So in like 30 seconds, he took a WPF sample, ported it over to Surface. Well, Doug, as usual, you're very charming, and the audience loves it. I'm a harsher critic.
I know.
I think it's great to show that developers are able to take their existing tools and code and skills and bring those over to Surface. But that alone doesn't justify using Surface. It doesn't mean enough to end users. When I was standing at the other end of the table, I didn't see the app the way you did. The way I saw it was a little different. You know, that we have a 360 environment. You're going to have people on some sides of this table saying, you know, having to read text upside down hurts their heads, or having to reach across the screen to hit that upload button is not a whole lot of fun. They didn't come for a workout. Or if you have someone who's antisocial, they're going to say that, hey, this is a single user app, and I don't like having to wait and share and take turns. I just want to customize my T-shirt. And then you're going to have somebody on the other side of the table who says, this thing is really just a big PC. I'm confused. Not necessarily unhappy, just confused. If you want to make an app that makes Surface shine, you need to take advantage of the custom capabilities that make Surface amazing, the unique things that we have. So that means massive multi-touch, having dozens of contacts on the Surface at a time, responding to all of them. Multi-user, having an environment where everybody can collaborate and work at the exact same time on a similar task. 360-degree UI, so people aren't all on one side of the table. Having natural gestures and manipulations, so you can interact with these virtual objects the same way you would with physical objects. And then having interaction with actual physical objects in your surroundings. What's great, though, is that when you're using the Surface SDK and you're using WPF, these things become really easy to do, especially when you take advantage of the Surface-specific controls that we provide in the SDK. So let's look at an example of that. I want to start with the scatter view control. I think the best way to explain scatter view is through a couple examples of how we use it. In our Photos application, you're able to take an individual photo and you rotate it, resize it, move it, pass it back and forth across the screen. Multiple people can do this with different photos at the same time. You can create stacks of photos, and of that stack that's non-rectangular and has rich interaction inside of it, you can, again, rotate that, resize it, move it, pass it back and forth in a social kind of way. Look at our music application. You can take a photo album where you have the album art on the back, and you can rotate, resize, move it around, pass it back and forth. You could flip the album over, and then you have a list of the songs on it. And again, that list is interactive, but we can take the whole thing and rotate it, resize it, move it, pass it back and forth in a social way. On the MP3 player in the music application, that has some really rich interaction inside of it. There's like a slider for adjusting the volume and buttons for play and pause and forward and back, things like that. And even there, you're able to rotate, resize it, move it back and forth. In a puzzle application, you're not necessarily here resizing things that make the puzzle very difficult, but you are rotating them, moving them around in a social way, trying to snap things together, working collaboratively. And what all these things have in common is that they're built on top of the scatter view control. So what scatter view lets you do is take any piece of content inside of WPF and quickly enabling for being used in a 360-degree UI multi-user type of scenario. It gives users direct control in a social, collaborative way of figuring out where do we want this thing to be, who should have it, what size should it be, things like that. And we standardize inside the scatter view all the semantics for what it means to rotate and resize and pass things back and forth. There's actually a lot of details into these where we've done tons of research and user studies and refinement to get it just right in all kinds of different scenarios. And that logic is baked into the control. So when all the Surface applications that we build and you guys build and our partners have built, as you'll see in the demos, they get the exact same semantics. So you get consistency across the board in a great way. Now, for developers, what's really cool about scatter view is that you already know how to code against it, because we derive from items control, so you program against it just like other items controls. Examples are list box and tree view and menu. So all those things you code against the same way as scatter view. So, Doug, let's do a demo of scatter view. Actually, we have a little secret on the Surface team. We judge the quality of a developer by how quickly they can build a photos application. The current world record is 2 minutes and 17 seconds. Would you guys like to see how Doug can do?
Yeah, why not?
All right. So I'm going to switch over.
Put me back on the code screen. There we go.
Tell me when you're ready to go.
OK, so I'm going to go from scratch here. And we're going to build a photos application using the scatter view control in under 2 minutes. OK,
ready? Go.
Go. All right, so I'm going to start with a brand new project. We ship a set of templates. So here we have a Surface application template for WPF. I'm going to double-click that. I'm going to go right into my XAML here.
Cool. So I've prepared a directory of photos on this machine that you could just data bind to.
Oh, well, thank you. That'll help. So I'm going to create a scatter view control here. And I'm going to give it the name scatter. And because we're data binding, thank you for setting up that directory, I'm just going to use scatter view's item template property to set the template for all of my items. And that means I'm just going to use a data template. This is standard WPF data binding syntax. My data template is going to consist of just an image, which I'm going to source to the bound item.
Cool.
Okay.
So you're a developer, Doug, so I expect you to write at least one line of code?
I will. I'll go do that right now. So as soon as the components are initialized, then it'll be available for use. So let's just go with scatter. That was the scatter view I created. And I'm going to, because we're doing data binding, I'm just going to set the item source property.
Just like you would with listbox.
And I'm going to use the directory that you set up for me. And that I will call get files on that. And where is that directory?
I put it in C drive /users
C users
/public
/pictures.
Oh,
very funny.
Yeah. /sample pictures.
Sample pictures. Thank you for preloading that.
Always helpful as a PM.
Yep. You have
they're JPEGs.
Okay, JPEGs. Got it. JPEG. Okay. Time.
Oh.
Did I make it? Or
1
did I
minute
talk
and
too long?
52 seconds.
Okay. Under 2 minutes.
Well, wait. He hasn't hit F5 yet. All right, Doug, hit F5.
All right, hitting F5. Here we go. And boom. we have a Surface Photos app, fully functioning. Multi-user, we can both interact with the content at the same time.
Hey, can I see that?
Yep, pass it right over to you. I can scale it, rotate it, move it, fully functioning, one line of code.
That's really cool. So, all right. Yep. So that photo demo is actually something that people can explore a bit farther when they go and participate in our hands-on labs.
Yes, and I hope they do.
Me too. So do you think you could show a demo of something that goes a little bit farther, showing things that, some richer properties of scatter view that let you customize it?
Yes, I think that would be a good opportunity here because scatter view is a lot more than just for data binding to photos for a photos application. Scatter view is for getting that consistent manipulation interaction for anything that you're doing on Surface. So in the interest of time, I do have a snippet here that I'm going to use, but I'll walk you through it and explain the changes I've made.
You're not on the clock anymore.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to replace that grid that I put the scatter view in a moment ago with my snippet here. Now if we scroll up to the top of this, here's the grid. I haven't made any change there. I still have the scatter view named scatter, so my data binding is still in effect. And this item template is the exact same one that I just typed. But I've added a couple things here because I want to show you what scatter view can do with some of these custom properties. Scatter view exposes a number of properties and events that allow you to customize the behavior of each individual item, or as you'll see here, all of the items collectively at once. I'm going to show three properties today. I'm going to show can scale, can rotate, which are Boolean properties. And I'm going to show deceleration rate, which is a double property. Now, can scale and can rotate are fairly self-explanatory and just indicate whether or not the item will respond to that scaling type of gesture or if you're rotating. If you have can scale turned off or set to false, then any sort of scaling will be disabled and the item will not scale. Same is true for can rotate. Deceleration rate is a little bit different, and it refers to how quickly the item slows down on the machine. So what I have here is for this scatter view, because I'm just affecting all of the items at once in this case, I'm setting the item container style. So just like with anything else in WPF, you can style a scatter view item. And so I'm setting up a style with three setters, one for each property: can scale, can rotate, and deceleration rate. I've got these data bound to some controls that I've also added to the application. So if we go down below scatter view here, you can see the other piece that I've added is this stack panel. And now the stack panel contains three controls. It contains a surface checkbox for scaling. It contains a surface checkbox for rotating. And then we contain a surface slider to change our double value for that deceleration rate. One other point of interest, the checkboxes are good for the Boolean properties, but for the slider you have to give it a minimum and maximum, and what are those values? And you may be wondering, what does 1 and 6,000 represent in this case?
I am wondering that.
And as I've told you many times, Robert, it's quite simple, in fact. Deceleration rate is measured in device-independent pixels per second squared.
You've told me that many times. I still don't understand what that means.
Little numbers mean the item doesn't slow down very much. Big numbers mean the item slows down very fast.
All right, that makes sense.
And this is a way that you can simulate different types of material or friction for your various items. So let's run this real quick now. And with the change that I've made, we still have the same basic application here. It's our Photos app that's data bound to the sample photos. But I've got this well-designed user interface here that allows me to modify those properties. Now you can see that the slider is all the way down. So that means that we have very, very little deceleration or very little friction. So it takes hardly any effort to get one of these things to the other side of the screen. But I can modify that by cranking this deceleration way up. And now when I push it, it's pretty hard to get one across the screen. So that's okay. You can go ahead.
We'll take it.
Same thing is true. I've disabled rotation. I can now no longer rotate it. But notice that I can still move and I can still scale easily, all just by setting a Boolean property. I can enable rotation but turn off scaling, and so now I've got a fixed size object that I can then move across the screen. So those are three of the very easiest properties that ScatterView exposes to allow you to customize your interactions and still have a consistent manipulation type of interface for your controls and your content.
That's really cool. So ScatterView makes it easy to take any content and make it work well, multi-user, 360-degree UI, gestures, manipulations, things like that. So we've covered those attributes.
Yes.
What we haven't covered yet is how you integrate physical objects into your application. Yep. So let me talk through the APIs for that. So the way we identify individual objects is through what we call the optical tags. Optical tags are predefined formats of dots that you place on the bottom of an object that the system sees and interprets as having a unique value. So today we support two schemes of these optical tags. The first scheme we call byte tags because it goes up to 256 unique values, so that's a byte. So there are 4 dots on there that tell the system, hey, I'm a tag and here's what direction I'm pointing. And there are 8 other dots that could be present or not present that give it its unique value. Now we also have a newer scheme called identity tags. Identity tags are named that way because the range of those values is so huge that you could use them to uniquely identify anything in the universe. We have billions and billions and billions of unique values. So the way you'd get these values is through the event args from any of our input APIs. You look at the event args, you pull off the contact object that's there, you say contact.tag, and then based on whether you're working with a byte tag or identity tag, you'll drill into those properties. But what we see more commonly is that most people, when they're working with physical objects, they have a very similar class of scenario. And what that involves is identifying, hey, there's an object that I care about on the screen, rendering some UI either under or around or next to that physical object, keeping that UI in sync with that physical object as it's moved and rotated. You want to move and rotate the UI accordingly so it remains under, around, or next to the physical object. And then you want to gracefully handle what happens when the user takes the object and either walks away with it or puts it down somewhere else on the surface. So this is what we built the tag visualizer control for. And let me walk through an example of how you would use the tag visualizer. Suppose you're building an app where when the user puts down a business card, you're going to render a ring of light around it that has the person's name and a little link that can be tapped to compose an email to them. So how would you implement this with Tag Visualizer? There's 3 easy steps. The first step is to define the actual UI you want to show up around the object. So we're going to create a custom control derived from the Tag Visualization base class. And we're going to set that up just like we'd set up any other custom control inside of WPF. And we're going to tell the Tag Visualizer the name of that custom control. The next thing we're going to do is actually get a tag on the back of our physical object. And we're going to tell Tag Visualizer the ID, the unique value of that tag that we're looking for. And the third and final thing that you have to tell Tag Visualizer is what's the relationship between these things? What's the distance from the center of where the tag is going to be seen by the system and the center of where you want the UI to be rendered? So with this information, Tag Visualizer has everything that it needs to handle the tag visualization scenario for you in a graceful way. It also has a couple of properties, though, that you can use to customize it a bit farther. So, for example, if you were building a board game where it's only valid to have a single instance of a specific object on the board at a time, you tell Tag Visualizer that max count constraint, and it'll automatically enforce it by filtering out the extra objects. Or if you want to customize how the control behaves when the tag is removed from the surface, you can go in and choose one of our predefined options or create your own. The default thing we do is that when the object is removed, we'll fade out the visualization. If the object is placed back before the fade out is done, then we'll fade it back in and animate it into position under the physical object's new location. So let's actually try building an application now that uses the Tag Visualizer control.
OK. I would love to do that. To demonstrate the Tag Visualizer control, it would be helpful, however, to have a physical object to demonstrate with.
Well, what do you know? Somebody left this here for us. This is a paint palette that we got at an art supply store, except we went and we drilled holes in it where you would normally place the paint so we can see through it and onto the surface. And somebody conveniently placed a tag on the back of it. So let's use this to build a paint app and control the color selection with our physical paint palette.
OK. I think we can do that fairly easily. So I'm going to start from scratch again. So here I'm going to create a new project. I'm going a little slower this time because I was in a hurry when I was going through the ScatterView one. We actually ship a template, and it's right here under Visual C# Surface version 1. And so creating a new Surface application from scratch is as easy as starting an application from this template. So going over to the XAML for this, because we're doing a paint application, I'm going to leverage another of the Surface version of a WPF control, and I'm going to use the Surface ink canvas.
So that'll be just like the one that you use with tablet PC and stylus, except this will work with multi-input, and the ink will match the shape of your contacts as they move along the surface.
That's correct.
So if you were to run this right now,
which I'm doing, F5. Okay. So now we have, all I've done is add an ink canvas so far, and we have a touch-enabled, multi-touch-enabled version of your standard ink canvas control. Neat, but not a lot to it.
we got to use the tag.
We will.
That's the demo.
Okay, put me back on code, please. All right, so the first thing you said, there was 3 steps. First step, create the visualization. What do you want the thing to look like when the physical object is put down? To do that, I'm going to add a tag visualization to my project. So I'll go Project, Add New Item. And in addition to project templates, we also ship some item templates. So down here under Surface, version 1, you'll see I've got a tag visualization template. So I can double-click on that, and I'm brought to the XAML for my tag visualization.
That is incredibly efficient.
And so we're going to want to have some kind of image that represents what this looks like underneath when we set it down.
Yeah, so I've loaded on your machine already an image, and this time I'm not joking, an image that matches the size and shape of this palette.
Okay, so we'll use an image for that then. And I'll set the source property equal to
C drive / palette.
P-A-L-E-T-T-E.
Good job, yeah, it's a tough one. .png.
Oh, it's a PNG file, okay. And so there's the image. Now, because we want to have some kind of color selection mechanism, I'm going to use a surface button so that it'll respond to touch. So let's add a surface button in here. Surface button. And for that, we'll want to give it a color. So I can use the background property for that. I'll set it to red. And we need to make it big enough so that it covers the holes there.
Right, these are pretty big, so maybe 85 by 85?
Let's try that. I have a feeling it might work. Oh, you guys have seen this one? All right, so I've got a button on there, but it's kind of hard just looking at the code
Yeah, so
here.
you've been doing lots of XAML editing by hand. We're using Visual Studio 2008, which has a nice XAML designer, so why don't we take advantage of that?
So let's take a look at what it looks like in the designer. I'm just going to zoom this. So you can see here's the image that you preloaded on the machine, and here's the surface button I just created. The nice thing about this designer is I can just move this button where I want it, stick it right there, and then I can copy and paste some additional buttons in here for the other holes.
Cool, so you're doing this in Visual Studio 2008, but this exact same kind of designer experience, that could be done in Expression Blend too.
That's correct, and in fact, if you guys are using Blend, we work just the same way with that as well. So you can use Blend to design some of the UI for your Surface applications. So I don't have these lined up completely perfectly. Let's tweak this one down a little bit. But you get the general idea. And then I can just go in here, and since we want something a little more interesting than a bunch of red, let's change some of these colors. We'll create one of those, one of those.
All right, now we're off script, so if this doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm blaming the audience. Okay, so I've now created step 1, which was to define my visualization.
So step 2 is...
Hello.
That was Azure.
See, this is what happens when you go off script.
Step 2 is to tell the tag visualizer control inside of our window about the tag visualization UI we created and the physical object that we have here.
Yes, so you said tag visualizer control, and I haven't created one yet, so I'm doing that now. And I really want to wrap the tag visualizer around the ink canvas so that the visualizer will work anywhere on the ink canvas. And so that's what I've done here. I've added the visualizer, and now we need to tell the visualizer, relate that visualization that I just created with that physical tag. And so we do that by using a tag visualization definition. This control is not for the abbreviated. So tag visualizer,
IntelliSense.
and we love IntelliSense. So it has a definitions collection here. And so inside of that, I'm going to create a new definition. And you said that was a byte tag.
This is a byte tag.
So again, using IntelliSense, I create a new byte tag visualization definition. And now I just need to use that definition to tell it to relate the source code that I just created, the source, and that was...
You creatively named that tag visualization 1.xaml.
I am a creative sort. Okay. Tag visualization 1.xaml, and associate that with value. And what is the value of that tag?
It's written on here, actually. It's 0x40 in hex.
Okay, so in hex, so we'll write it in hex there. And then that's step 2.
Right.
And then your third step...
The third step is to tell Tag Visualizer what is the physical relationship from the center of the tag to the center of where we want the visual to show up.
Okay. Can you eyeball that for me?
I can try to eyeball it. So I would say it's off in the x direction by about 0.23 inches, minus 0.23 inches.
Okay.
I'm very precise.
And how about the y direction?
That is minus 0.4.
Minus 0.4. Okay, so now these are in inches because we're talking about a physical object here. So that gives us the offset. What about the orientation? Does it look like it's on straight?
It's on pretty straight. I was only off a little bit. It's offset by 266 degrees.
Okay. All right, so I think we've completed step 3. So all of the tag visualization part of this application should be done.
Right.
But we still don't really have any functionality.
Right, your buttons aren't doing anything yet.
Not doing anything. I haven't actually written any code yet. So let's write some code. Up here on the grid, I'm just going to add a handler for surface button.click. So anytime a surface button.click, we'll do the on button click event. So in Visual Studio, I right-click here, navigate to event handler. It'll create one for me by the name I typed in there. And so now I can write some code.
Right, so we need to figure out which button it was that was clicked, because we're using a routed event.
So we know it was a surface button.
And we can get this from the routed event args.
Yep, and the routed event args are E by default. So that would be the original source.
Right.
And we have to cast that as a surface button.
Now, from this button, we need to get the color that's applied to it. We
Right.
do that on the background property.
And the background property is a brush. And in this case, it's a solid color brush. So we'll just use a solid color brush. Call it brush. I am creative. And that is the button.background. Again, casting as the correct type.
So now, from that brush, you should be able to get the solid color on it and apply that to our ink.
Yes, so those of you that were paying attention may have noticed that I named the ink canvas inker.
Always clever.
So referring to that instance, you can go to the default drawing attributes and set the color property. So we'll set that equal to the brush.color. And I've written 3 lines of code. I think it's an official app.
Let's find out. You got to hit F5.
F5 it is.
All right, so our app shows up. I actually brought some paint brushes to go along with this. You know, we're talking about using physical objects.
Default canvas here.
So I'm going to take this, I'm going to place it down, and now we have our color selection showing up. Take it away. Yeah. So now, Doug, you're such a great demoer. I'm going to draw you a picture.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a little sun.
Can you build me a house in the sun?
A house in the sun? How about
outside of Seattle?
I'll give you some water, and I'll build you a house boat.
Houseboat. Is that the sail or the roof? Okay.
It's both. Dual purpose. All right.
And can you sign it?
No.
Okay. What do you guys think?
So physical objects, 3 lines of code. So we started out by showing a demo of taking an application from the Windows SDK, a sample WPF app, porting it to Surface, showing how you're able to reuse all the things you already know, but how that doesn't create the right user experience. And then we've gone and we talked about the custom controls that ship in the Surface SDK, like scatter view and how that lets you bring out the massive multi-touch, the multi-user, 360-degree UI, natural manipulations and gestures with virtual objects. And then we talked about the tag visualizer control that lets you bring in the object recognition capabilities of Surface and natural interactions with everyday physical objects in your surroundings. So, Doug, were you, by any chance, while I was over here yapping, taking that photo store demo and incorporating scatter view and tag visualizer into it?
As far as you know.
That is incredibly convenient. Would you mind showing that to us?
I would love to show that to you. Can you put me over on the Surface
Yeah.
display? OK, so I've got basically the same concept here, but now imagine the in-store display is a Surface unit. And instead of a rigid one-directional interface, I'm leveraging scatter view to move around the selection of photos. And in fact, it's multi-user. I can toss that over to you.
Thank you.
It's still got the same Surface list box in here for displaying the content. But notice that there's nowhere to say, select this photo, interact with this photo kind of thing. I actually brought props of my own. And what I have here are some cards. I'll give you the T-shirt. And this is basically, I don't know how well you guys can see on this camera here, but these are just plastic cards with identity tags on the back of them. This one indicates like a 4x6 print. This one indicates a greeting card. And so if I just set that down on the Surface, I now have a template laid out for me, giving me instructions as the person in the store, telling me to drag a photo here to create a greeting card.
And I can play too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's multi-user. So I can drop that right on top of my greeting card. And now instead of having a button to tell me to rotate or to clip, I can actually directly interact with the content, move the item around, get the clipping and the rotation just exactly like I want it. And then when I'm ready, I hit the Buy It button, and it tells me to take this card up to the counter to complete my purchase. So this is a Surface-ized version using scatter view and tag visualizer with a much more rich, interactive interface.
Cool. That's awesome. What do you guys think? So taking these controls, adding them into an existing application to pretty quickly make it bring out all the unique capabilities of Surface and enable some brand new scenarios. So we've been talking about how the Surface SDK is built on top of things you already know, like Windows Vista and WPF 3.5. You've probably heard the announcements that Windows 7 is going to have multi-touch support as well, and you're wondering, how does this all fit together? What does it mean? So I can tell you. So when Windows 7 ships, they're going to include a series of native APIs in their SDK, and they're going to have a managed wrapper that goes around that so that you can use those APIs, their multi-touch data, from a WinForms app or even a WPF application. Now, we know this isn't the best story. We know that the Surface team, we've done a ton of research and made lots of progress on how do we expose multi-touch data and user experiences in a great way through WPF. So where we're headed is we're working closely with the Windows 7 team and the WPF team to have a cohesive platform for the future. So what's going to happen when WPF 4.0 ships and Surface 2.0 ships is we're going to be working on taking the core concepts from the Surface SDK, what we've done in our APIs and controls, and move those down into WPF 4.0. So if you build against that, you'll have a baseline type of application that can run equally well on Surface or Windows. What you'll want to do, however, for Surface is take advantage of the extra unique features that we have around 360-degree UI, massive multi-touch, object recognition, things like that. So that's where, moving forward in the Surface SDK team, we're going to be putting a ton of investment into building out new APIs and new controls like scatter view and tag visualizer that bring those unique capabilities of Surface even closer to being easy for you guys to use and incorporate in your applications. So to wrap this up, we believe that Microsoft Surface is at the forefront of changing how people interact with technology around them, bringing out the multi-touch, multi-user 360 UI, making computing social in a way where you're sitting face-to-face with somebody across a table, collaborating in a really, really unique way, and also bringing in physical objects in your surroundings. Now, doing this requires a ton of creativity and innovation in the user interface area. So there's lots of challenges here, but those challenges are really opportunities for all of you. Who's going to be the one to go out there and think of the correct solution for old problems and how that should work in a multi-user, multi-touch 360 object recognition kind of way? Who's going to be finding all the new problems that come up when we're doing these kinds of things and solve those? So there's lots of challenges, but tons of opportunity, especially if you're going to get creative and innovate on top of these things. For developers, what's great is that everything you already know about WPF carries forward. So the learning curve for getting into Surface from a raw development perspective is really easy. The challenge is really on the user interface. And lastly, Microsoft is working to create a long-term cohesive platform for doing touch across the board so you don't have to learn a ton of different SDKs and APIs for doing baseline types things. So, call to action. Surface is a fairly bold product, so I have a fairly bold call to action. I'm just going to lay it out there. That's to help us change the world. You know, we are changing the way that people interact with technology, making it social again. It really is unique and powerful. And you'll see that as you walk around the floor and see how people are working with the systems that we have out. So how do you change the world with us? Well, you need to create the applications that leverage the unique capabilities that we have. And you can do this now, as of today, as Brad was mentioning. You can go on to surface.com as of today and get an order form. Click on the customers link, and the order form is there. Until November 15th, we have a 10% discount, so get yours now. And in addition, as you're leaving the room today after this session, be sure to swipe your badge with somebody who's wearing one of these fancy Surface shirts. And you'll get an email later in the week that has a unique invitation code to join our community site on surface.com, where you'll be able to download the bits, including a Surface simulator, so you can do development on a standard PC when you don't have access to a Surface. You'll also have access to our forums and other training materials and things like that on the Surface community site. So we're really excited about finally being able to engage with you and seeing the types of applications that you're going to build on top of our platform. So with that, not yet, related content. We're really excited about engaging with you, and we're not done. We have other things at PDC. We have three hands-on labs here at PDC. Two of them are running in the same machines as the WPF hands-on labs, where you'll work with the simulator. You'll explore the simulator. You'll explore building a photos application. And then we have one set of hands-on labs that runs on actual Surface units, where you'll get to build something that leverages the scavenger hunt cards that we're passing out. So you can build your own app that works with physical objects. Around the conference center, we have demo tables with apps that our current partners have built that will inspire you on how you can get involved as well. And in addition, if you want to learn more about Windows 7 and what they're doing with multi-touch, you can attend their session on Wednesday at 1:15. So with that, I'll call Brad back up, and we'll take questions. So for the Q&A, we have microphones in the back. If you could use those, that would be great, so it gets caught on the recording.
If your call to action is successful and you change the world, how will you ensure that Surface apps will be accessible to the blind and physically disabled?
So that's a challenge, and it's a challenge for Surface computing everywhere, and it's something where I can't say that we have a solution right now, but it is recognized as a big challenge.
Keep trying.
Thank you. Over here on the left.
Do you have any plans to port this SDK to any other multi-touch hardware, like the touch wall that you guys showed at the CEO Summit?
To date, we have focused our support on the hardware that we're currently building. That is a question that we get on a regular basis, and it is something that we continue to evaluate. But today, our focus has been on the hardware that we provide. Cool. In the middle.
Hello? Yeah,
Sorry.
Just for the scavenger hunt thing, I know when you added the tag, you had a number for it. So did you actually have to enter each one of these manually in there, or is there like a pattern you can match on, or anything, any support for that right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way the identity tags work, the 128-bit ones, we actually break that 128-bit number into two sections. The first 64 bits are what we call a series. So So you can say, here's a group of related tags. So what you program into your application when you're working with identity tags is, I want to know about all objects that match this series. And then you look at the second 64 bits to identify a specific object.
Thanks.
Great question.
Over here on the right.
Is there any current support for reading barcodes?
No, so right now, we're not able to do that. The resolution of the cameras isn't quite there. But we're really proud of the identity tags and how we're able to get billions and billions of unique values. So over here.
Back to the left.
Yeah, can you, out of the SDK, create your own tags, the identity tag graphic yet, or where do we get those once we get the SDK?
So we have a print tool that we're working on making available on the Surface community site. So when you get your Surface or swipe your badge on your way out, you'll get access to the community site where you'll be able to download that later.
Middle.
I had exactly the same question. Thank you.
Another question from the middle.
Is there going to be any chance we would ever see this multi-input stuff on Windows XP at all?
Oh, or whether or not you'd see touch down on Windows XP? You know, that's a question that's probably best asked of the Windows folks tomorrow. I would probably doubt it, but I would leave that to them to answer. Over here on the right.
Do advanced elements in WPF work with the surface controls, things like viewport 3D and media element?
They do. Absolutely, yeah. So media element, for example, we use that in our photo application so you can play videos, things like that. Yeah, okay, totally.
Thank you.
On the left.
Is there a mechanism to sort of generically translate the touch and the gestures to applications that wouldn't otherwise support the surface controls? For example, photosynth. If I bring up a web browser control in a WPF app and want to be able to translate those gestures into allow me to navigate the photosynth.
Sure. For us, we're really focused on getting applications that are custom built to take advantage of what makes us unique. You could ask the Windows guys what they're looking at. They have a few examples of how they're bringing multi-touch into legacy applications.
In the middle.
The actual physical tag that goes on the object. Now, what kind of material is that, and what is the heat and cold sensitivities that it can take?
What really matters is how well the thing reflects infrared light. So there are all kinds of different combinations you could do it as. We have tags that are actually completely transparent that work well. So you can use different types of materials. You just have to experiment and find something that reflects light the correct way.
So specifically for that, we do, when you order a development unit, you'll get a sheet of stickers that are meant just for development purposes so that you can stick them on your physical objects. But as Robert mentioned, as part of your manufacturing process, if you're going to go broad scale with that, is there's a number of different materials, and it's just whether or not it reflects infrared light that's important.
On the right.
So what is the resolution of the cameras that you have currently?
I don't know offhand what the camera resolution, the display resolution is 1024/768.
Yeah, really the challenge as it relates to the resolution is both the cameras as well as the diffuser. So the previous question about the barcodes, that's directionally where we want to go, but it takes both work from the cameras as well as the diffuser to be able to recognize those things. Left.
Assuming that we're not going to have development units initially, are you able to tell us what spec hardware, the processor, video card, memory, is in those things?
Yeah, when you sign up for the community site thing, in the email it'll have what our prerequisites are. That'll cover hardware as well as what things you need to have installed.
Okay, thank you.
Middle.
Are you working with the guys that have made the touchless SDK?
The touchless thing. So that came out of Office Labs, where it's not so much multi-touch, they're just experimenting with different things. So
that came out of our research group, really, where they take a look at different innovative ideas in the future and that sort of thing. So today we're not integrated with that product. It's something that we look at on a regular basis, but to date we're continuing to focus on the hardware that we have here.
On the right.
Are you ready to deliver some units to Europe as well?
Well, I would like to say the answer to that question is yes. We are just in the process of rolling out our international plan, and we'll start to deliver units into 10 countries in EMEA starting in January. And if you come by the booth and you look for Samana, he can give you more information on that. Or you can come talk to me and give me your card afterwards.
In the middle?
Hi, you use the ink stuff there. Do you have any opportunity for using handwriting recognition?
So handwriting recognition. Since we're using ink canvas, we derive from ink canvas. We are able to leverage their ink analysis stuff that's already there. So yeah, we've done that where you can write stuff with your finger and it gets recognized. Yep.
On the right.
I don't think there is anybody else.
No one on the right?
Stay in the middle.
Back in the middle.
Hi. So I saw that the partners that you showed were very commercial focused. There's rumors of other markets. Any comments there?
Yeah, that's a great setup. The one thing we forgot to mention as you think about developing applications for NUI is that we do have a goal to have a product in the consumer market within 2 to 4 years, which is all the more reason for us to start developing applications, content, and services for NUI today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome.
Any other questions? Over here on the left. On the left.
The mic on the left here.
I don't think, there it goes. Is there any support for like hardware APIs, so hardware vendors that support multi-touch and their devices can make use of the Surface SDK? Like there was a vendor giving out cards at the door today.
Yeah, I saw that. That's a creative way to market your product. I like that. But today, no, we haven't. It is something that we continue to get asked about, and we do take a hard look at that. And it's something that may happen in the future, but today we're just focusing on the hardware platform we're providing. In the middle.
Oh, sorry. Quick question about the hardware. So if we buy this Surface computer, how do we upgrade the hardware? Do we have to go through Microsoft, or can we just rip it open and replace and upgrade the cameras as they become available?
Well, if you purchase the hardware from us and you open it up and replace the hardware, then you do actually break the warranty. So we don't actually encourage you to do that. But in general, if that's something you choose to go off and do, there is ways to open it up and change that stuff out. Over here on the right.
Does the hardware come in different sizes? And second question, can you also use it vertically?
Well, today it comes in one size. We do continue to look at different form factors for the future. And I guess you could put it vertical if you wanted. It's pretty heavy as it is today, so it might be a challenge. Object recognition as it relates to tags and other things isn't going to work as well in a vertical form factor. So we encourage it to be horizontal.
You would lose a lot of the unique qualities that Surface provides beyond multi-touch, the 360-degree UI, etc. And depending on how you're mounting it and where you may run into heat issues if it's not ventilating vertically or whatnot. So structurally, it could probably take it, but I wouldn't recommend it as a general practice.
Middle.
Is there a way to, if you're creating a custom control, utilize the keyboard functionality with your own control?
Yeah, so the keyboard APIs are there. We have standalone APIs you can call to say, show the keyboard in this layout, in this direction, and the text box and password box just do that automatically for you.
Cool. Okay, is that it, or we got one more?
I have a last one.
Yes, last one.
I was wondering if you were supporting the WinForm elements control that provided by WPF.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Like in WPF, you can host WinForm controls, and do you support it as part of your SDK?
Sure. If you wanted to get Surface input into a WinForms control, you'd have to use the core layer of our APIs, where you just give it your HWind, and then we'll throw those events at you. Sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.